Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are in the world. I trust that you are all well. Just want to say hello to Pinky Princess for being the first in the comment section. I hope that you're well, sister. Just give us a quick yes or no. Can you hear me? Is the sound working fine? And just so that I know that I'm coming through before I get started properly. So if someone could just say yes or no, if the sound is coming through. Thank you very much, Riley. Peace with you, Johnny, and peace with you, Skittle J, and who else? Riley, thank you very much. And Spore 26, you're not second, bro. You were miles off from being second, but nice try. And also Austin Chic, as well as Claire. And someone said in the comments, quite a few new faces, Hyperslav, interesting name, Honorand and David Tutting and all the rest. I hope that you're all well. So before I get started, I'm just going to talk a little bit to let the room fill up. And then what we're going to do is we'll start the Q&A. And the way to do the Q&A is to put @Bob and then ask your question, but don't do that yet because your question will just be missed. Wait until I say that I'm doing the Q&A. But also, I'm going to open up the link and I'm going to let people come on and either make a comment or ask a question in person if they want to. So a couple of things. So I was at ARC conference last week. And I wrote a blog on it. And if you've not subscribed to my blog, I encourage you to do it. All the links are in the description box. And I wrote a blog on ARC. But essentially, you know, ARC, this conference that was started by Jordan Peterson as a way of trying to reset the meta-narrative and get the West back in touch with its deeper roots, is looking for a better story to rejuvenate Western civilization. And it strikes me that the better story for us as Christians is going to be the kingdom of God. And that needs to be the story by which we organize and seek to organize our civilization, where civilization itself serves both as a tool of the kingdom of God, but also as an expression of the kingdom of God. Because I don't think that harping back to the Enlightenment and the best bits of the Enlightenment is really enough. And really what we're talking about when we're talking about Western civilization, we are ultimately talking about a Christian civilization. And the Christian civilization was started because people wanted to see God's kingdom on earth. And that is a central tenet of the Christian faith, is that pursuance of the kingdom of God. Now, if you'd like to read a bit further of my thoughts on that, then do go to the blog. I just want to say, guys, that I've got a lot of stuff in the back catalogue, both on my channel and on my blog. Live streams, videos, debates. If you haven't gone through the back catalogue, I'd encourage you to do so. Another thought is that this Friday, I'm participating in and helping to organize a protest against the king Mr. Windsor himself, Charles Rex, for the fact that he has continued to drift upon the vow that he made, which is to be the defender of the faith. And he's not doing that. He obviously wants to reframe and reposition himself as a defender of faith. And there was a recent document released by the government. It's not a document released by the royal household. It's released by the government. It's talking about the royal finances. I think it's the Royal Sovereign Grant, but I might have got that name wrong. And in that, it said that one of the king's roles was as the defender of a space for faith in a multicultural nation. Now, that is not in line with the oath, but it does reflect comments made by Charles 20-odd years ago, 3 years ago, in how he envisions the royalty. And I think, Charles is thinking about his legacy because it's obvious he's going to have a short reign, but he wants to be remembered as the monarch that reformed the royal family for the 21st century and for 21st century Britain. And in his a vision of that, it is clear that what he views the faith as being is something shared amongst all different kinds of religions, and it being one faith. He seems to follow some kind of universalist theology, which is in complete contradistinction to the vow that he made in church at his coronation. And so I and lots of others are going to be hopefully protesting outside of Windsor Castle in Windsor this Friday at 4 o'clock, and you're invited to join us. Okay, so what we'll do, guys, is we'll open up questions. If you have a question, put at Bob, and then I know that you're asking a question to me, and I'll get into it. And if you haven't, then I'll share. If you'd prefer, I'm also going to share the link, and you can come in and ask a question or make your comment in person, and I'll reply to that. I just want to say, guys, the work of evangelism that I do it by the generous support of Covenant partners. So if after some prayer you think that you can support the work that I do, then all the links to do so are in the description box. So please prayerfully consider that. And if you can, then feel free to click on those links and to become a Covenant partner or to make a one-off donation. And thank you so much. And look, everybody's doing the at Bob thing, and we're getting good questions in. So let's have a go. So question, why was God pleased with David giving Saul's sons to Gibeon for vengeance? Merab's sons couldn't even partake in the genocide against them. Saul was king for at most 13 years after Merab's marriage. So it'd be helpful if you give the passage just so that I can look it up. But in terms of how God views us, and C.S. Lewis writes on this as well. We think in terms of individuals, individual rights, individual responsibilities, but God thinks in a much more collectivized sense, and actually, as Christians, so should we. That God looks at families, family lines. He looks at nations, and he looks at nations' behaviors, and he takes them as a whole, because no one's behavior is independent of their upbringing or their culture or their surroundings, whether they're reacting to it or being formed by it. The sins of a father do fall on the children, and in God's foreknowledge, God could also see, for instance, that perhaps if these sons were left alive, that they could in some way be a threat to David, as it was common in this kind of culture, that you would seek to take retribution. It's a common human instinct. So without seeing the exact passage that you're talking about, Caban, that would be Gibeon, sorry. That would be my sort of understanding of it. Because it says Merab's sons couldn't even partake in genocide against them. Who's the them? Are you talking about David and his family? The Saul was king for almost 13 more years after Merab's marriage. I don't think that the vengeance, and again, I'm saying this without seeing the text, because you haven't given me the text that you want me to look at. I don't think that the vengeance is going to be connected to the punishment that fell upon Saul in losing the kingdom, because he didn't carry out God's command, but rather because after receiving the judgment that he's going to lose the kingdom, he then sought to kill David. And I suspect that might be what's going on there. So if you feel I've missed that question, do bring it back and we'll take another run at it, but bring up the passage for us. Okay. When I explain to friends the barbarism of Islam, but they answer that Christianity did the same, but with no evidence presented, how do I reply to that? Yeah, I mean, it is, I would actually reply by saying that they are just replicating their conditioning. So liberal society has convinced everybody with no evidence at all that all religions are the same, that all religions have done the same, that all religions are as bad as one another, that everyone in every religion is equal of this, can do the same good, and that they all teach the same thing. That's what you're going up against. And I would actually challenge them by pointing that out and then asking them, okay, right, give me an example of when, for instance, the Christian church for nearly 1,000 years went around kidnapping the children of its enemies and then enslaving them, converting them to the religion, turning them into a warrior caste, and then sending them back to kill their own people. That's what I'd ask them. And I'd hold their feet to the fire and keep challenging them again and again and again, that they're making statements without evidence, that they're making statements without a basis. And they'll often throw out the things like, the witchcraft trials and the Crusades. And you've got to take each one of these cases independently. But if you've given the example of the Janissaries and then they bring up the Crusades, it's like, no, hold on, these are not comparable things. But it's really important, if you're going to get into this historical whataboutism, that you have actually taken some time to study history. Now, I would also just say that there is a real big difference here in the sense that, if we look at the Inquisition, for instance, where would you justify the Inquisition from the life and teachings of Jesus? Like the worst examples of the Inquisition, where can you find, an example of its justification directly from the teachings of Jesus? The Inquisition was a churchianity thing rather than a Christianity thing. And we've got to acknowledge that there is such a thing called churchianity. Not all churchianity is bad. There's a lot of good things when it comes to churchianity. But churchianity has also done all the bad stuff as well. But when you point out, for instance, child marriage, well, that isn't something that the Ummah made up. That's something that Muhammad did according to the hadiths. And so, the difference is we're not comparing the whataboutisms of it's better to move away from the whataboutisms of barbarisms in history and go to a comparison of Jesus versus Muhammad and do that comparison and challenge them on that basis. Who's the better person to follow? And so that's usually how I address it. But you've got to burst the bubble of liberal indoctrination that says that all religions are just as good or as bad as one another, and that they all teach the same thing. And you should challenge liberals for thinking like that, because they're religiously ignorant. So, born and raised a liberal Christian in DK. Don't know where DK is. I have a hard time going back to the folk church here because of the liberal takeover. Came back to faith with help from you. How to live as a Christian. So firstly, Paul, thank you for sharing that. It's always an encouragement to me when I hear that I've helped and contributed to people becoming Christian. It humbles me, actually, to know that the Holy Spirit has used the efforts that I've offered for his purposes. Now, I don't know where DK is, so some of my comments might not be relevant to what you're saying. I would say this. I would say that, firstly, there's going to be other churches that you can go to. Just because the church that you grew up in is a liberal church doesn't mean that that's the only church that you could go to. There's lots of other churches that you could go to, and I would want to encourage you to find a better church. Find a church that is devoted to prayer, devoted to the apostolic teaching, devoted to the sacraments, and devoted to the fellowship of the believers, both congregationally and further afield. And devoted is doing all the heavy lifting there. It show, you know, a church is devoted, shows its devotion by offering time, money, energy, and resources to the thing that it is devoted to. And so go and find a different church, you know, a church that accepts the Nicene Creed, and get involved in that other church. If you're stuck, I don't know where DK is. I mean, if it's a village in the middle of nowhere and you've only got one liberal church to go to, then consider yourself a missionary in that church. Try to get the Christians in that church into apologetics, try to get them into evangelism, and also try to get them into standing in solidarity with persecuted Christians. Because when you get them to do these three things, one, makes them realize that not all worldviews are the same. Two, it gets them into the idea of having a distinction between them and us, and seeking to draw them into the us. And three, it encourages the Christians to realize that there's a real cost to being a Christian, and that people are dying for it, and that this is a serious thing, you know. So that would be some advice that I would give on that. But there's only one way to defeat the liberal takeover of the church, and that's to take over the church yourself. Get onto church government. Get onto the PCC. Get onto the deanery council. Get onto the synod. Get onto the governing bodies of your church, and have a clear understanding of, you know, what it is to be a Christian, and what church should be about, and then be that voice that calls for those things in your church government. So I hope that helps. So guys, I just want to encourage you, if you haven't already, please do like the video. That helps me so much. You know, if you like this video, or you like a video in the back catalogue, please do share it with other people. Do go check out the back catalogue. And if you haven't subscribed, and I get a lot of people who watch my videos and don't subscribe, like every YouTube channel, please take a minute to subscribe. And I've just realized that I have not plugged in my computer, so I've just got to go and switch the power on. So bear with us 1 second. And this is usually where I get kicked off my own live stream. So I'll be back if I get kicked off. Right. So next question. Thanks for all the hard work. It is appreciated. Is the Christian Nationalist Fellowship an organization that can be joined? I can't find a specific website, and many thanks. So just to let you know, guys, if you want to, you can go to my website, you can book in a Zoom call, you can have a conversation with me. And it's free. The Christian Nationalist Fellowship is an organization based in the UK. At the moment, it's only just started. I think they've only had 2, maybe 3 meetings. And we're still, as a group, trying to figure out what we're going to try to be doing, if anything at all. And so for that reason, it's by invite only. But I wouldn't be part of that group, and I would leave that group if it didn't ultimately start to become a public group that any Christian nationalist could join. You know, and the point of Christian nationalism is it's the belief that the Christians are a people. So if you're a Christian, you are a people along with every other Christian. And as a people, we have social, cultural, political, economic, spiritual, and political goals and objectives that we seek to achieve. Now, some of them we share with everybody else. They are what we call common goods, and some of them are what we would call particular goods. And Christian they're unique concerns to Christians because they're Christians. And the common goods are goods that we, want to pursue, and we share them with everybody of any faith. The point that of Christian nationalism is it helps Christians to identify as a group, to work as a group towards common aims and common goods. Liberalism has completely failed us in the West. So we need to abandon liberalism for something. And Christian nationalism is the something that we should abandon liberalism for. Across Europe, across America, we need to just acknowledge that liberalism doesn't work. It creates more problems than it solves. It's making everybody's lives worse off. And we need to adopt a different way of organizing society. Is there evidence that the Islamic Injeil ever existed? The answer to that question is, of course, no. There is not a scrap of evidence anywhere that there was anything called an Islamic Injeil. Not one shred. And so it isn't just that this is an argument from absence, which is no argument from at all when in historical terms. The church made a point of engaging with its opponents, even small groups like the Gibeonites, and the Nazarites or Nazarenes. That it engaged with tiny sects that were competing with it. So if there was a tiny sect out there that we might describe as first century Muslims, the church would have engaged with it, and I just find it absolutely hilarious, this idea that we're all supposed to accept that there was another book and another community with another Jesus 2,000 years ago, and the only evidence that we have speaks about a Jesus that the Quran said never existed, who had a book, who never had the book that the Quran said did exist, and no one engages with that reality at all. Now, what is more realistic is obviously that the Quran is talking poppycock, and that the Islamic Injeil never existed, and that the Islamic Isa never existed. There's no evidence to support it. The first time that this suggestion is ever made is in the 7th century in Arabia by a prophet said to be called Muhammad. That's it. That's not evidence that any historian can take seriously. Now, guys, if you would prefer to make your comment or your question in person, I am sharing the link. You can do so. And you have the opportunity to come on and have your 2 minutes of fame and say what you want to say, or ask what you want to ask. And I'll probably engage with you a little bit more than I will with a written question. Okay, let's move on. Okay, I'll answer that. So just to let Raidy know, let me just bring him in. How you doing, Raidy? Raidy, can you hear me?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Well, I can't believe I'm talking to you.
Great. So I can barely hear you. I don't know. Can you get closer to your microphone?
I'm sorry?
There we go. That's a bit better.
Okay.
So what do you want to say, or what do you want to ask?
So it says in John 14:28, the Father is greater than I.
Raidy?
Jesus is saying this. But
Hello, Raidy.
everybody in the Trinity is equal.
I can't hear you, bro. There's something going wrong with your sound system. Okay. Raidy, there's something going wrong with your sound system, so I'm going to bring in someone else, and then I'm going to come back to you. In the meantime, if you could just work on your sound system, I'll come back to you after I've spoke to Priscilla. How are you doing, sister? Peace be with you.
And to you. Can you hear me?
I can, loud and clear.
Oh, good. Hello.
Brilliant. What would you like to ask, or what would you like to say?
Well, I hope this isn't a silly question, but
There's no such thing as a silly question.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm disabled. I've got a fractured back, and it's hard for me to find a good church. I've been to a few, and it's getting really, really annoying now because they're either very progressive, or I find that the pastor's ego is bigger and thinks they're sort of, they're pushing their self and not God. And I'm a very early Christian, about a year, and I'm not sure what I can do to try and find a good church. If there's a certain, sort of, gospel church, or this, what sort of church could you recommend that I could go to that is probably going to be what I'm looking for, that puts God first?
Well, I take it you're limited in how far you can travel.
Yes.
So my best bet, going on what you're telling me, is maybe try. Have you tried a Roman Catholic church near you?
No, my son goes to Roman Catholic Church, though. He did offer me to go, but because obviously like I say, I'm a early learning Christian. I've still got a long way to go, but I have turned my life to God. But I thought because they prayed to the saints that wasn't the right thing to do. Is that
no? There's nothing wrong with praying to the saints. It doesn't in any way compromise the Christian faith. You don't have to pray to saints if you don't want to. But I'm just going on the fact that, given that you've probably got limited mobility, obviously and thankfully you're not looking to join a progressive church. And given the abundance, the only two churches out there that have a presence nearly in every community are the Anglicans and the Roman Catholics. And so, since the Anglicans are probably going to end up being progressive, I would suggest that you maybe get involved in a Roman Catholic church. And I say that not because I'm trying to steer people into the Roman Catholic Church, but you've probably got there'll probably be a church in striking distance. And the Roman Catholic priests tend not to be as progressive, and also they tend to be much more humbler. If you're happy to say where you are, people in the comment section might also make suggestions of good churches in where you are in the comment section, and you could come back in a couple of days and see if anybody puts a church in there that you could look at. Oh, she's gone. Don't know what happened there. Okay, might have been an internet disconnect. So moving on then. So what's your thoughts on Luke 22:38 and the two swords? I think, Christ was walking around with armed men. Now, the sword that we're talking about I think it's called in Greek a Makaras. It was your Swiss Army knife of knives in ancient Judaism. They'd be used for everything, both as a tool, an eating implement, but also as a means of defense. And so Christ was walking around with armed individuals as a matter of course. And so this means that, it's another example of why he wasn't a pacifist. But he says, to go out and to sell your cloak and to buy swords in Luke 22. And we'll just pull it up. Let's just get it up. 22:28. $22.38. And they said, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. Now, he'd said that immediately prior to this, he said this. Let's just find out where this whole thing goes. He said, reading from verse 35, and he said unto them, when I sent you without purse and bag and sandals, lacked you for anything? And they said, nothing. Then he said unto them, but now he that has a purse, let him take it, and likewise his bag. And he that has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. So this is he's contrasting when he sent out the 70 without any provisions. And now he is saying, be prepared. Be prepared for what's to come. Be ready to go about and to do your business, the business of the kingdom. And then he goes on and says, for I say unto you that this is written must yet be accomplished in me. And he was reckoned amongst the transgressors, for the things concerning me have a fulfillment. And so when he's saying to the people, go out and get swords, it is to fulfill prophecies, prophecies that the people that he was with would be reckoned as he would be reckoned as being amongst transgressors. Not that they were transgressors, not that they had done anything wrong, but that they would be reckoned to be so. And that's because he knows what's about to come. And then they draw out the 2 swords and they say, here are 2 swords, which means that they had these swords already. And he said to them, it is enough. And so the 2 swords, as Cornelius of Lepida said, and they said, Lord, behold, here are 2 swords. They did not understand the mind and words of Christ clearly. He did not mean that they should buy swords, but he wished to show them the impending danger. Christ did not explain his meaning to the apostles, but concealed it, saying, it is enough, meaning that Peter and the other apostles might carry these swords and even cut off Malchus's ear, which he himself afterwards restored and healed, showing that he was not compelled by force, but was urged by love, willingly and freely, to suffer and to die. Some think that they were not military swords, but rather large butcher's knives, which the apostles used for the slaughtering, sacrificing, and disjointing of the paschal lamb. St. John Chrysostom said, from whom I have said more on Matthew. And so you've got this sense that Christ is using these swords as a prop, but they also become a symbol as well. It's the 2 swords that is wielded by Christendom, the sword of the state, which is, and the sword of the Spirit. So Peter wields the sword of the state and he cuts off Malchus's ear, and then Christ, wielding the sword of the Spirit, heals that ear. And then he says to Peter, do you not reckon that I could call down 12 legions of angels? He doesn't say to Peter, in fact, I'll just read the passage. So when they come, it's a bit further in the chapter. Reading from verse 49, but when they who were about him saw what would follow, they said unto him, Lord, shall we smite with the sword? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his right ear. And Jesus answered and said, no more of this. And he touched his ear and he healed them. Then Jesus said unto the chief priests and captains of the temple and the elders who were to come to him, do you come out as against a thief with swords and clubs? And so Christ is seeing that Christ is saying that the kingdom can't be advanced, or the causes of the kingdom and his mission can't be accomplished by force. But he's not saying that they should never have carried the swords or that they should have thrown the swords away. These people left that garden still armed with the swords that Christ commissioned them to carry. And there's meaning in that. And so in its historical context, it's to fulfill prophecy. In its symbolic context, it speaks to the power of a Christian state and the power of the Christian church. And it shows that secular Christians can wield the sword, but they must do so in line with God's purposes, not against God's purposes, which is what Peter's mistake was. Hopefully, Colvins, I addressed your question, but if I didn't, do get back to me, and we'll go some more. So here's the link, guys. If you want to join, if you want to ask your question in person, the link is there. You can ask a question in person. Don't know what happened to the sister or why she went, or the brother whose sound wasn't working properly. So come on if you want to. I would just say, if you haven't already, please do like and subscribe and share the live stream so that other people can join in. So, do you think there's any truth to the rumor King Charles has converted to Islam? No, I think there is no truth to that rumor at all. I think it's really silly. I think people that say it are being very silly. There's no evidence for it. You know, because you've got to say the Shahada to someone, right? So if you said the Shahada to someone, do you think they'd really be keeping that a secret? Now, of course, Muslims like to make fake conversion claims. That's sadly a tactic that is used in Dawaganda. But if anything, King Charles is just a liberal Christian. He's been raised by a liberal church. He has liberal Christian views, which means that essentially, I think he's a universalist. That doesn't mean that he's converted to Islam. He just genuinely thinks that all religions are leading to the same God and they're all legitimate paths on the same spiritual journey, which of course is complete bunkum and total heresy. But that doesn't mean that he converted to Islam. And I think some people are so traumatized by the existential threat of Islam is that they funnel everything through the prism of Islam, even when it's got nothing to do with Islam. And they can't see anything else but Islam. If that is you, if you're feeling the pinch when I say that, then I want to encourage you to stop focusing on Islam and focus more on Christ for your own spiritual well-being. And through that, start to investigate the world, because it will allow you, I think, a better measure of what's happening in the world. That being said, I do want to encourage everyone that can to make it to Windsor Castle at 4 o'clock on Friday to protest the king's slide away from his oath and his undermining of his own oath, which has been sort of once again brought to light by this government document talking about the king's responsibilities, echoing the king's own words from a few years back. How are some of the slaughters in the Old Testament reconciled with the New? The only consistent answer I have heard is that of William Lane Craig. Well, I don't know what William Lane Craig's answer is, but we know that God has the right to judge the nations, and that God indeed does judge the nations. And so he uses nations to judge nations. So, for instance, he used Babylon to judge Israel, and then he used Persia to judge Babylon. He used Israel to judge the Canaanites and the Philistines. So the idea that God can pronounce judgment over a nation is incontrovertible, and the fact that he uses nations to judge nations is also incontrovertible. And so these judgments that befall nations, like Sodom and Gomorrah, just because they're carried out by another nation does not mean that they are immoral. These are God's judgments. Now, what's important is that we've got to make a distinction in our reading of the Old Testament between description and prescription. So description is obviously just God, the scripture describing something that happened in the past. Prescription is God commanding it for the present. And the problem is that people often don't understand that distinction, and they read every passage of the Bible as if it's a prescription, and it's not. And now these kinds of attacks against the Christian faith, particularly when Muslims do it, you've got to understand is that they're doing it because they've been stung by our criticism of Muhammad's own example. And the problem with Muhammad's own example is it's meant to be an example for all time, everywhere, and all places. So when, as the hadiths say, that Muhammad was planning to commit a genocide of all the Christians and Jews in the Arabian Peninsula, then that is an example to Muslims. It's not, whereas the Old Testament massacres are not an example to Christians. And when Christians engage with this, even the earliest church fathers, they didn't treat these as, when they gave exegesis on these matters, they didn't treat these as moral examples of how to do things in the real world. What they did is they used these as examples of how we should massacre the sin in our own life. In other words, they spiritualized them and turned them to applications for within the soul, thus showing that the church has never read these as prescriptions of behavior, but merely descriptions of God's judgments in the past. I hope that helps, bro. God bless you as well, Hyperslob. Is it okay for non-Catholics to pray the Rosary and say Catholic prayers in Latin? Yes. Why not? Yeah, of course it is. Firstly, there is no special language in the Christian world. Latin is not a special language. I mean, I love Latin. I can speak Latin. Well, at least I can recite prayers in Latin, like Confitio Dei Omnipotenti et vobis fretereque peccavi cogitatione et omissione, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, ed io preco Mariam Surginem Virginem et Angelos et Sanctos et vos freteres, orere pro me ad Dominum Deum nostrum. So I can do the prayers in Latin, but I don't think that Latin is special as a Christian. I mean, it's got a certain cultural weight to it that I think we should honor Latin as being the mother language of French and Portuguese and Spanish and Romanian and Italian and a number of other languages, and its influence on the English language. But beyond that, it's not special. It's not more sacred to pray in Latin than it is in English. So, but if it helps you pray, then pray in Latin. And the Rosary is not the possession of the Roman Catholic Church. It is a meditative tool that any Christian can use, and it's a set of prayers that any Christian can use, and a way of praying that any Christian can use. basically. Just like the hymns of, of John Wesley don't belong just to Methodists. Catholics sing them, Anglicans sing them. Personally, I prefer the Chaplet of Divine Mercy rather than the Rosary, but that's just me. So, moving on. Please put at Bob if you want me to notice your questions. What is your opinion on the Oriental Orthodox Church? My opinion is that it is a Christian church like any other. I want to put an open invite out to Bishop Mary Emmanuel. I've been trying to reach out to him through different avenues for a while now to try and get him to come on my channel to do a live stream to talk about the Oriental Orthodox Church. But so far, we haven't managed to pull it together. No direct communications have been established, though indirect ones have been established and then faded. So if someone could just get this message to him, I'd love to have him on to talk all things Oriental Orthodox in an explorative way, not a sort of like Chalcedon versus non-Chalcedon dynamic. But yeah, the Oriental Church is not, as it is often misdescribed, a Nestorian church. Most of its theology does not come from Nestorius, but it comes from another theologian whose name I can't remember. And their understanding of Christ incarnate is pretty much it is more than compatible with a Chalcedon understanding of the incarnation. Yes, Nestorius did flee to the east after I think he was falsely accused of Nestorianism. Nestorianism obviously should be opposed. Nestorianism is false doctrine. It is heresy, and those that adopt it are heretics. But I don't think Nestorius actually adopted what we call Nestorianism. I think he was accused of it, not that he actually believed in it, and it got named after him. And then he fled into the East. He got accepted by the Oriental Church of the East. The Church of the East. He got accepted by that church. He became one of its members. But that church was well established long before Nestorian joined it, and it never was a Nestorian's church or the Church of Nestorius. That's just a sort of Western slur, to be honest. And it's time that our language and our ecumenical discourse caught up with the facts, rather than trying to pretend that we're still living in the 4th century and that every position and perception of the 4th century Christian about other Christians at the time is an accurate one, because actually they're not. Okay. How do you reconcile the analytical search for meaning with the surrender required by faith? So, unless you're meaning something particular about the analytical search for meaning, like it feels like to me like you might be trying to use some, or that you are using a philosophical term, in which case I may misunderstand your question. I'm sorry if I do, but please clarify and try again. But the search for meaning and surrendering faith are not contradictory, because when we surrender, or rather it's probably better to say to enter into relationship with God through Christ by the Spirit, we find meaning in that. We find meaning as we start to offer up our souls and bodies to be a living sacrifice to the Lord our God. It starts as we start to see ourselves as the priest of God, as part of the holy nation of God here on earth. Then these things start to imbibe our lives with meaning. And as we start to direct our lives towards the establishment of the kingdom of God on earth, then that fills up our life with meaning. And we begin to see that every area of our life, all aspects of our life, all of our attitudes, all of our perceptions, all of our prejudices, all of our passions, our desires, our hopes, our dreams, our wants, our needs, they start to become reframed within that story, conformed, as it were, to our passions become conformed, as it were, to the image of Christ that is being born in us as we become born again. And that is achieved by placing our faith in Christ. And that does not contradict any analytical search for meaning. And by analytical, I'm guessing you mean rational or reasonable, maybe, or an incisive study. Well, I mean, an incisive study of the Christian faith doesn't contradict, the practice of faith. It can actually help to understand what faith is. And that search for meaning itself points towards something above reason or mere reason, because rationality and reason can't give us all. It is a great tool for discovering things and organizing things, but it can't answer all the needs of our being, because our being needs things that are beyond reason and are in some cases irrational. Like love can be irrational. Beauty can be irrational. Music can be irrational. Spending time enjoying things can be irrational. So I don't think that these two things are in contradiction. I've taken a guess at what you mean by analytical search. If I've misunderstood your question, Tyler, do ask it again. So I'm just going to take this interlude to put the link into the description. If you want to join this, the link is there. You just join, click on it, and you can come in and ask your question or make your statement, and I'll reply to it. I would just say this, guys, that if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. Go and check out the backlog. I have a massive backlog of 9-8 years worth of videos. Really good stuff. If you go back and read through, maybe even create your own playlist, you're going to, I hope, find lots of edifying things there. And if you come across a video that you like, share it with people that you know. You can book in a Zoom call with me if you want to. Just go to the website and you can book yourself a Zoom call for free, and we'll sit and chat for an hour about whatever you want. And, I've got a whole bunch of live streams coming up in the near future with different people to talk about different things, but there is a huge backlog that you can go through. And I think you also might enjoy reading my blog, certainly if you like listening to me talk, as some of you do. Okay, so back to the questions. Follow. I feel very isolated here. More traditional Christian. I feel very isolated here. Have a hard time finding more traditional Christian communities. I feel drawn to Catholic or Orthodox faith because of the liberal folk church. What can I do? Go and join a Catholic or Orthodox church. There you go. It's about taking the initiative, guys. Like, when you've got a challenge in life, you've got to own it. You've got to own it, and you've got to try and do your best to tackle it. So if you feel drawn to the Catholic or Orthodox Church, go and join it. Why not? I mean, it will help you. If it helps you to grow, the thing that you've got to ask about any church you join, and I would encourage you not to take the sort of package understanding of Christianity, but to approach your journey as a Christian ecumenically, which means that you should look at each congregation for what it is, not the denomination that it might belong to. I'll give you an example of this, because, for instance, the United Reformed Church in the UK is notoriously liberal, but yet I have found such a traditional, solidly based Christian United Reformed Church here in London, based in Kensington. You know, I never would have thought, if I'd just taken the attitude that United Reformed Church equals liberal, I never would have found that congregation, but I did find that congregation. And I found it because I don't judge a church by its denomination, I judge it by its congregation. And so my advice to you is to find a congregation that helps you to grow in faith. And if you feel drawn, and if you can, join a Latin Catholic Rite Mass, join any Orthodox church, and you will probably find the kind of traditional Christian community that you're looking for. You know, but it's about owning the problem and taking the initiative. Okay. Please do put at Bob if you want me to engage with your questions. If you want to come in and ask, then do come in and use the link. Bob, the passages about the sons given to Gibeon for vengeance is in 2 Samuel 21, 1-5, 6-8, 9-14. The genocide I meant was the house of Saul killing the Gibeonites. Let's just go to 2 Samuel 21. Let's have a look. Right. It's 1-5. Okay, I'm going to read 1-5, or 5-6. Let's look at 2 Samuel 21, 5-6. Let's have a read. Okay. Okay, so it looks, bro, from a cursory reading, that it's a treaty. I'm again, there's probably a bit of context that I'm missing, and I am, but it looks to me like it is a treaty connected for the purposes of peace, or to settle a blood dispute between the Gibeonites, and to settle this issue of how Saul tried to destroy them. And so in terms of this, you know, in verse 7 it says the king spared Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, because of the Lord's oath that was between them, between David and Jonathan, the son of Saul. Because in verse 6 it says, let men of his sons be delivered unto us, and we will hang them up unto the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, whom the Lord did choose. And the king said, I will give them. So it's essentially, and I think you've got to appreciate that justice in the minds of the people in ancient Israel is not a liberal justice. It's not an individualized justice. People carried on their feuds intergenerationally. And so because the Gibeonites had been wronged, and they had the desire to have the Gibeonites' children destroyed and their entire, I'm guessing it's a tribe or a clan maybe, annihilated. They were asking for vengeance, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for a hand, foot for a foot, life for a life, son for a son. And it was this kind of vengeance that the Gibeonites were asking for. And it looks to me like David is agreeing to that on the basis of a way of ending, and making peace with the situation. Because it says, and with that I shall make atonement, that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord. And it's that bless the inheritance of the Lord, which means that makes me think he's trying to put to bed this issue and this reality with regards to like stopping them being a contentious group that could harm Israel. In the same way that, down through history, many kings have sent captives to their opponents as a way of securing a peace treaty, even their own sons and daughters. One thinks of Jan Hus, who was sent or commanded to go and live amongst the Ottomans as a guarantee of peace and obedience by the King of Romania. And so that to me seems to be what's going on. Again, though, it's description, it's not prescription. David's example here is not telling me now today that the way that I should do justice is to have the children of my enemies slain. And I think people miss this when they're reading the Bible, and they try to attack the Bible without understanding that the new covenant and the old covenant and that covenantal system is how Christians actually read the scripture. And so we know that David was a sinner. We know that David did wrong, and we're not trying to say that every judgment that David made and every call that David made was a good one. And I'd invite you, bro, if you want to talk about this more, to book yourself a Zoom call and we'll chat further about it. But it seems to me, just reading the passage that you've referenced in your message, that David is looking for a way to end the hostilities with the Gibeonites, or the tensions with the Gibeonites, and also to give some restitution for the wrong that was done to them by Saul. And he's doing it in a Bronze Age way. That isn't to say that that is an example to Christians today, or even to say that it was necessarily the right call then, because I don't think in this passage, let me just scan over it again. I don't think there's anything in this passage that suggests that God was instigating this, but rather it's just describing what David did. I might be missing a verse. You might know of some other verse in this passage to talk about. But yeah, that's what it looks to me what's going on. Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you attempt to commit a genocide, people are going to be pissed, and I think that as a way of ending that sort of blood feud, it was a way, and I think that's what David was doing. He was ending that blood feud. But then you have this sense of, the fact that he keeps his own oath to Mephibosheth, because of his own oath with Jonathan, which highlights the importance actually of oaths, which is quite interesting, because we're going to be talking about that on Friday at 4:00 outside Windsor Castle, when we're protesting the fact that the king seems to be failing to keep his oaths. Okay, Keyban, I hope that helps. So, Bob, to get a job, I had to lie and produce a fake certificate. It's a job I have done before several years ago. I really need it to support my child. I know how narrow the path is, what to do. Well, I would say that if it is a certificate like, you know, if it is a certificate, firstly, if you're telling the truth that this is a job that you did several years ago, it would depend upon what the certification is that was needed. So, for instance, and again, there's obviously a lot of stuff I'm missing from the context of this situation. If it's a certificate connected to something like doing surgery or being a doctor or something as serious and of such gravitas as that, then I would say that you need to own up, resign, and go find another job. You know, I would suggest, depending on how long you've had this job and on the relationships that you had this job, if you've got good conduct and good custom, you could probably go forward and say, look, you know, I did this. I'm sorry, but as you can see, I can do the job. I have done the job. I was in a tight spot and a difficult situation. You know, please have mercy upon me. You know, I didn't know what else to do at the time. If the certificate was like, well, you needed to prove that you had a degree, you know, and you couldn't find your university degree or your university had closed and you faked that certificate, then you need to go and confess it. And in fact, actually, you should go and confess all your sins to your brothers and sisters. But you need to confess that. And what I would advise is the next time you're in that situation, rather than fake a certificate, like your university diploma certificate, then just go find another job. You know, go find another job. Like if it is a technical certificate connected to, I mean, I'm not an expert on these things. I don't know. Like like doing insurance. If you've definitely had that certificate in the past, but you've lost it and you can't get the original or a copy of the original, but you've definitely had it in the past and you know how to do the job and you can do the job without causing people harm or putting people in danger, you know, then again, go and confess it to your brothers and sisters, and maybe, you know, like, and just press on. But if you're doing a job where your certification, like maybe to be a psychologist, is something that's kind of needed bona fide, and you know, maybe you lived in a country where they didn't have certification for being a psychologist, and now you come to a country where they do require certification and you haven't got the right certification. In that case, quit, leave. So it depends. The question, I guess what I'm saying is, it depends on how serious the certificate is. Like if it's something to do with medicine, you know, quit if you haven't got the right certification. If it's a case that you had the certificate, you've lost the certificate, but you did earn the certificate in the past, and you just, for whatever reason, can't get that certificate, you know, but you genuinely did earn it in the past, and the only thing stopping you getting this job is this complication, then I wouldn't say repeat this, you know, but what he's done is done, and just confess your sin, make a resolve that the next time you're in this situation, you're not going to repeat this problem, and carry on with your life. You know, but it really does depend on how serious the job is and how serious the certificate is that you need, to be honest, as to whether I feel that you need, whether I would advise you to tell your employer. And what is to stop you to get that certificate again, why can't you just, if you had it before, why can't you get it again? You know, because if you did this job at some point in the past, one imagines that you needed the certificate in the past. So it's a bit complicated when you don't know all the circumstances. But the rule would be, if you're doing a job that may put other people in danger or harm other people, and you need that certificate, then quit and leave immediately. And if it is the case, why isn't that on? Actually, let's just leave it. We just have to do this in the dark. Let me just put the light on. There we go. If it's something minor, like you got a degree, you lost the degree certificate, but you definitely earned it in the past, so you made up a fake one because you can't get the original, but you needed the job, you know, then making in a resolve not to do that again. You know, confess your sin, and so long as you're not putting other people in danger, press on with your life. But if you want to talk about it more, book a Zoom call via my website and chat with you. It's hard to guess when I don't know all the details. To be honest, it's a complicated situation. But as a rule, bro, I would say that if you're making things up to get jobs, then you're already losing. The point of the Christian faith is not to get through life. The point of the Christian faith is to get through life virtuously, rather than just to get through life. And if you have to lie to get through life, you know, then you've already lost in a way. So are there ways that you could support your child without lying? Can you find other jobs? But again, I'm kind of clutching at straws because there's so many possible variables of the situation that you're describing. Zytro, how are you? Zytro, do you want to come in? You want to say hello?
Yeah, Bob, how are you?
I'm well, thanks be to God. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not too bad, thank you. Just put the kids to bed and I'm just chilling today.
Brilliant. Do you want to give us your question or your comment?
I'm just in the background at the minute, just absorbing everything, what type of questions are asked, and yeah, just get a feel for it.
Well, in that case, then I'm going to ask you to remove yourself from the studio, because I'm only putting the link out for people to come on, ask questions or make comments.
Got you. Okay, I'll just stick to the YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, guys, if you want to come on, please come on to ask a question or make a comment, not just to sit there. Okay, next question. Let's have a look. What is your opinion on where King Charles fits into the Bible? Is he depicted in Revelation? No, not at all. I don't think that. I think there's a danger with Christians, particularly when it comes to reading Revelation, is that we always try to imagine that the prophecies in Revelation are written for our time. And the bit that's being missed is that the prophecies of Revelation are written for every time, for the first century Christians and for the last century Christians, whenever that is. And so it's a very dangerous kind of exegesis that lots of Christians have fallen into at different points in history, where they take what's going off in their world and then seek to apply it to Scripture. And so I don't see Charles fitting into Revelations anywhere. That I don't see him. I don't see his universalism as a particularly big threat to the church. It's just his redefining of his job needs to be done through a democratic process, not just by fiat, not just by his fiat, and not just smuggled in the back door through a civil servant's document. Like something as big as redefining the role of the king can't be just smuggled in because some civil servant, echoing the king's own desires, decides to write it in the hope that nobody notices. But beyond that, no, Charles, I don't see anything in Charles's statements that's connected to revelations or his behavior.